Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world, and today we're going to have a brief review of percentages, specifically how to find a percent of a quantity. So you'll probably remember that this symbol here means percent, and the word cent is short for 100, so we're talking about per 100. So if you know you got 58% on your test, it means you got 58 questions right for every 100 questions they were. Now, hopefully you also remember that percentages are just another way to write fractions and decimals. So for example, 40% is the same as 40 hundredths, 40 over 100. You can actually simplify that fraction to 2 over 5. Another way you can write this is by taking 40%, you take 40, divide 100 on your calculator, you get 0.4. This and this are all the same number. So we use percentages because they're fractions whose denominator is 100, and 100 is just an easy number to work with, like a point of reference. So then, you know, if you got 21 out of 30 on a test, it might not be so easy for you to decide whether or not you did well. But if we convert that to a percent, it's 70%. That gives you a lot better understanding, a point of reference. So, converting fractions, decimals and percentages can be done at this level with your calculator, so that's fine, the SD button on most calculators, but it is fairly straightforward to do it in your head. You know, if I have 32%, I can just write that as 32 over 100 and get my calculator to simplify it. It's actually 8 over 25, or just write it as 0.32, not too hard. So now we're going to look at finding a percent of a quantity. So let's say we have a question like I want to find, let's say, 40% of 60. So remember, 40% is the same as 40 hundredths. So I'm effectively taking 60, dividing it in 100 parts, and I'm wondering how many of it will be there in 40 of those parts. So in other words, I'm finding 40 hundredths of 60. Now hopefully you remember of means times. So, you know, half of 50 means a half times 50. 3/4 of 100 means 3/4 times 100. So this would just be the same as 40% times 60. But you can't just put in 40% times 60, at least in the calculators that we use. You have to write it a different way. So what you have to do is you take the percentage and you change it into a fraction or a decimal. So what I would put in my calculator is 40 over 100 times 60. Put it in your calculator just like that, the answer is 24. If you prefer to work with decimals, you could have written 40% as 0.4 times 60. Again, put it on your calculator, the answer you get is 24. So what you can see is there are 2 steps here, and I'm going to write these down and rub off this example, so please copy down if you need it. So these are just the 2 steps whenever you want to find percent of a quantity. Change the percent to a decimal or fraction, either way doesn't matter, and then use your calculator to multiply that decimal or fraction by the quantity. So to give you another example, let's say I want to find 12.5% of 120. Very easy, I convert 12.5% to a fraction or a decimal. As a decimal, it is 0.125, and then I multiply that by the quantity, which is the other number. So I just put in my calculator 0.125 times 120, and I get 15. Done. Okay? If the question said 12.5% of, say, $120, then my answer just needs to have the correct units there as well. Okay, so now we're going to look at when you don't know the original number. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the question 15% of which number gives 36. So this would be more for the green students. So this one is different because we're not finding 15% of 36. That would be straightforward. But there's a certain number, when we take 15% of it, the answer we get is 36. So we're sort of doing this the opposite way. So in this case, instead of timesing the quantity by the percent, we're going to divide the quantity by the percent, 15 over 100. So you can just put that in calculator and the answer you get is 240. So what that's saying is if I take 15% of 240, I get 36. So please make sure you note the difference between when you're finding just a percent of a quantity and when you have to find what number, when you take a percent of it, gives you, in this case, 36. All right, just one more thing we need to go through for green students. Black students can stop here if they need. In this module, we're going to be looking a lot at financial maths. So sometimes you'll come up with things that have been discounted or marked up, and you have to increase a number or decrease a number by a given percent. So there are two ways to do it. So first one is probably easier to understand, but it takes a little longer. So the first method is where you find the percentage of a quantity, then add or subtract it. So that may not make sense to you. So let's say, for example, that I want to increase, let's say, $80 by 25%. Okay? So this is exactly the same as if I were to say, you know, a company sells a t-shirt. It cost a company $80 to make a t-shirt and they want to sell it for 25% more than the cost price. Same question. So let's do these steps. First step we're going to do is find the percentage of a quantity. So first thing I'm going to do is find 25% of 80. We do that exactly the way I just showed you. So we change 25 to a fraction or decimal. Then we multiply it by 80, and you can use your calculator for that. So that's 20. So 25% of 80 is 20. If I want to increase $80 by 25%, I just add that onto the original. So I get 20 plus 80 equals $100. So there were a couple of steps in this, only two. So that one was a little longer method than the one I'm about to show you, but it's easier to understand. So the second method involves a simple multiplication. So if I want to increase by a number by r%, I multiply by, in brackets, 1 plus r over 100. To decrease, it's almost the same thing, except I multiply by 1 minus r over 100, okay? So let's have a look at the exact same question that we just did. If I want to increase 80 by 25%, so what I'm doing is I can take 80, I multiply it by 1 plus 25 over 100. Because of the distributive law, if you were to expand this, you'd get $80 plus 25% of $80. And if you put that in your calculator, you just get $100. So I'll do one more example, this time with a decrease. So let's say I want to decrease $120 by 30%. So this is the same as if I asked you the question, you know, an iPod costs $120 but has been discounted by 30%. So the astute of you will know that when you decrease 120 by 30%, you're doing the same as finding 70% of 120. So we could just use our previous examples and we could just go 120 times 70 over 100. Nothing wrong with that. That is actually using this formula. So 120 times 1 minus 30 over 100, that's the same as finding 70% of 120, because 1 minus 30 over 100 equals 70 over 100 or 70%. Either way you do it is 100% fine, and the answer you get is 84. And you need to put the symbol there, so $84. Now I could have used method one. I could have found 30% of $120, which is $36, and then subtracted that from 120. I would have got the same answer. Either way you do it is fine. It's been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Hope you have a great day.